My name is Tukelon Shapo. I'm going to be chairing today's webinar. We're going to have a presentation by John. John is a long-time liberation movement activist. He was a history teacher at the ANC's Solomon Mahlangu Freedom College and an education policy researcher and a special advisor to the Minister of Higher Education. I'm going to give John 20 to 15 minutes, and then Neo will speak for about 5 to 10 minutes, and then Bridget will speak about how we can get the book. If you're ready, over to you, John.
Thank you, Tosego. And I'd like to thank this history workshop for this opportunity to share our work in this setting. I'm not speaking too clearly right now as a result of recent surgery, so please bear with me. If you have any problems understanding me, or if my speech deteriorates, please drop a line in the chat box, and the chair can then ask me to hand over my presentation to Karen, who's sitting next to me. Please don't be shy, I won't take offense. Also, I'd like to apologize for the absence of my co-author, Maryke Bailey, who has not been feeling well. I'd like to start.
Minimize.
Okay, I'd like to start by speaking briefly about the genesis of the book. A few years ago, former President Kgalema Motlanthe approached me to develop a curriculum and related materials. The idea was to use these in the ANC's education program, for which he was responsible at the time. In further discussions between us, it was decided very early on that a book should be produced. It would be aimed at a wider audience, well beyond only the membership of the ANC, and made accessible particularly to non-academic and non-specialist readers. This, we felt, would contribute to a broader knowledge of South African history among its citizens, leading to a more informed public discourse about both our past and in particular about our present. I then looked about for a fellow author and eventually entered into a productive relationship with Maryke Bailey, a secondary school history teacher with experience in materials development and teacher development. This book is aimed at providing history. Can you hear me?
Go there.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, John, go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead, please.
Thanks.
There was a bit of feedback.
This book is aimed at popularizing history in South Africa as a way to inspire a sensitive and critical understanding of the past, and to inform current public debates about how to overcome the nation's challenges. A poor understanding of history among the broad population, and even among politicians, public servants, trade unionists, journalists, and public commentators of various kinds, holds back the growth of cohesion, solidarity, and social stability in what is still a deeply divided society. History can help us to understand human societies and how they develop and change. The past illuminates the source of the current conflicts and achievements and helps us to understand their origins. Given the sweeping political changes in South Africa, effective history teaching has inexplicably not been prioritized in our schools since 1994. The curriculum has been changed extensively to make it more inclusive and progressive, and it continues to be re-examined and revised by the education authorities. The problem lies in another direction. Up to and including grade 9, history is only half a subject. It shares the time available for the subject social sciences with geography. And for the last 3 years of school, history is not compulsory and is only taken by a small minority of students. These facts, together with the appallingly distorted version of history taught before 1994, means that most South Africans have a scant and superficial knowledge of the country's past. This prohibits meaningful discussion of the challenges faced by modern South Africa, as well as limiting appreciation of the progress the country has actually made. Poorly informed interpretations of the past, often based on ethnic and racial mythologies, continue to bedevil social interaction and are seldom made explicit or open for re-examination. In such circumstances, populist sentiments are more likely to gain traction, leading to much uninformed and superficial discussion around complex issues. A deeper and broader knowledge of our history can lead to a better understanding of how the past has helped create the present. This in turn can inform public debates on a range of issues, including the shaping of democracy, race and ethnic relations, poverty and inequality, economic development, and so on. Most probably all of the people in this seminar are aware that history is not just about what happened in the past, but also about how historical events are interpreted in a wide variety of ways. But this is a view that is not as widely held as we may sometimes think or hope. It's an insight, an approach that needs to be learned and nurtured. Different historians see the world differently. They have different political, social, or personal agendas, and this will inevitably influence the material they include in their accounts and their interpretations of historical events and processes. Readers should be able to discern these agendas and how they are presented. This is best learned in discussions and debates with others, and by comparing the approaches of different writers to the same subject matter. Those involved in such debates should learn to listen to the arguments and viewpoints of others, and to engage with them on the basis of evidence, as well as moral and ethical considerations. The discussion and questions and further readings at the end of each chapter are aimed at developing these skills. A brief history of South Africa covers a broad sweep of South African history from the earliest times to the Mandela Presidency. It does this by presenting both a chronological narrative and theme-based chapters. I'll say more about that structure shortly. An accessible overview like this, covering such a long period of time, tries to cover the most important elements of each period, but because of this, each chapter is rather short. The average length of the text in each narrative chapter is about 6 pages, and for the themes, the average text length is about 9 to 10 pages. The book also includes illustrations. It's designed to accommodate book clubs or study circles, both in formal and non-formal contexts. Every chapter is followed by a set of critical questions for discussion. These are designed to encourage people to consider different points of view and to exchange views and discuss their differences based on evidence obtained from this and other books in the reading list. The questions are also intended to assist teachers or facilitators or group leaders to stimulate critical discussion among their students. Recognizing that teachers may have problems getting hold of many of the books or journal articles, we have included both web-based readings as well as those in hard copy. Most of the book's attention is focused on the period after 1870, when discoveries of minerals resulted in the mineral revolution and the beginning of South Africa's transition from an agricultural to an increasingly industrial and urbanized society. As the book's core is an account of the dispossession and subjugation of the African people since the beginning of colonialism and their struggle to liberate themselves and regain their freedom and independence. However, the book is more than a history of the liberation struggle. It outlines this history against the background of a broader South African history, including developments in the economy, the struggle over land, the development of the trade union movement, the strategies of successive governments and other white organizations to maintain white supremacy, and the various armed conflicts among South Africans, including the Anglo-Boer War, 2 world wars, and the armed struggle for liberation. The book has 2 parts. Part A is a chronicle narrative of South African history. Part B is composed of 9 particular chapters. Part A, after providing a background on pre-colonial history, colonial occupation and slavery, the book examines the process of colonial expansion and the reactions of African people to it. This reaction was both military via the wars of resistance and political through the establishment of African newspapers, African independent churches, and particularly political organizations from the 19th century up to the formation of the African National Congress, the ANC. Well, at that time called the South African National Native Congress. Attention has also been paid to other political organizations, such as the African People's Organization, APO, led by Abdul Rahman, and the various Indian congresses, whose most prominent early leader was Mohandas or Mahatma Gandhi. Running parallel to these developments and intertwined with them is the unfolding history of the relationship between British imperialism and Afrikaner nationalism. This led to the Anglo-Boer War and then to reconciliation, culminating in the establishment of the Union of South Africa in an agreement that excluded black people from state power. The history of the various liberation organizations is followed through the decades as black people confronted increasingly intense and systematic oppression by successive white supremacist governments. The book covers the launch of Mkhonto and the creation of a variety of liberation alliances, such as the Congress Alliance, the alliance between the ANC, SACP, and SACU, and the more recent tripartite alliance. Considerable attention is paid to the working class. The development of the migrant labor system, the founding of the CPSA/SACP, the very large but short-lived Industrial and Commercial Workers Union, the ICU, and various trade unions from the beginning of the early 20th century through the establishment of key federations like SACU in the 1950s and COSATU in the 1980s. The book also pays attention to important non-ANC aligned organizations such as the Pan-African Congress, the PAC, the Black Consciousness Movement, and trade union organizations like the National Council of Trade Unions, NACTU. Almost every chapter also deals with economic developments, mining and industrialization, the establishment of the state-owned enterprises, and other things, and how they affected the development of the country and the different impacts on both the oppressor and oppressed populations. The importance of the 1976 Soweto uprising is examined, as of the growth throughout the 1980s of the armed and underground struggle, and particularly the mass struggle conducted through the United Democratic Front. The growth and significance of the international solidarity movement is also given focus. Part A concludes with 3 chapters on the unbanning of the liberation movement, the clandestine negotiations, and the first democratic elections, leading to the establishment of a democratic government under the leadership of Nelson Mandela. The second part of the book, Part B, deals with the historical development of 9 themes. It does this in more detail than appears in the narrative part of the book. The themes covered are the economy, the Bantustan, schooling, poverty and inequality, life under apartheid, women's struggles, the trade union movement, South Africa's successive constitutions, and the international solidarity movement against apartheid. This will enable readers who want a quick overview of a particular theme to access the relevant material easily. Each chapter or theme also contains illustrations and photographs, and is followed by a list of further readings and discussion questions. This makes the book ideal for use in study circles or reading groups. As Maryke and I wrote the book, we had two key groups of readers in mind. One was adults in a non-formal setting. In this regard, we expect the book will be useful to the educational programs of trade unions, community, youth and women's organizations, political organizations, church groups, and others, as well as book clubs. Other key target groups is history teachers. The book provides them with an opportunity to expand their knowledge, especially if they do not have a specific history qualification, as many do not. There is also an appendix which provides sample exercises and memoranda which can be useful in the classroom. We believe that through teachers, the book can help to strengthen the teaching and learning of history in South Africa at the school level. In universities, it should be useful in teacher education, particularly in the training of history teachers. In addition to its usefulness in educational settings, we think that the book also has a wider appeal. This is confirmed by relatively strong retail sales through both physical and online retail outlets. Readers have also been downloading it on Kindle. This broad appeal lies in the accessibility of the language of the book, the relatively short length of each chapter, the additional sources that the reader wants to take up that option and dig deeper into one aspect or another. I won't say more about the book now, but if anybody would like clarification on any aspect, I'd be happy to address that in the Q&A session. Before concluding, I'd like to take the opportunity to say how much we appreciated working with Takana Media, our publishers. They've been efficient, helpful, supportive, and a real pleasure to work for. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much, John, for your presentation. At this point, I'm going to give Neo 5 to 10 minutes to speak more about the book. And then after that, I'll give Bridget to say a little bit about how we can access the book. And then after that, we'll have a comments and question and answer session. Thanks. Go ahead now.
No, you're still muted.
Yes, thank you Tukelo, and thanks John for your presentation. I just want to start by saying how I relate with John Pampallis. John Pampallis, 29 years ago, which is 1993, was when I was doing my higher diploma in education at the University of Natal. John was my history teacher in terms of when we do teaching practice. They call them now TE, teaching experience. We call them teaching practice. When I was doing my teaching practice, John came and sat in my class and observed me. And I really say, even when it's almost 30 years ago, John, I appreciate the way, as a student of history, you're able to give me constructive criticism. And I think it's from that I'm here now at Wits in the School of Education, doing the same work that you have done with us. So I've been at Wits in the School of Education, teaching history of education for the past, this is my 5th year now. And I mean, John, a lot of people claim the struggle, history activism. John was at Morogoro, and when he was teaching me in Devon, we were able to establish that he taught one of my brothers who was MK Kadra, who was at Morogoro as well. And when I told him, my brother was saying, yeah, John was a good teacher there. So John, thank you also for that. So let me go on to this book. So when I got the hard copy of this book, during the times of colonialism, they've always been hated. The first thing that I really liked about the book was the cover images. You know, they are a representative of South African history, a brief history of South Africa. I mean, the image there, you have Bantu Steve Biko, you have Rolihlahla Nelson Mandela, Free at Last, and you have Table Mountain, and you have the mines there, discoveries of the gold and diamonds, and you also have the student protests, June 1676. And what I really appreciate, John and Maryke, is that you also included Charlotte Maryke, you know, one of the first African women, South African, to have a bachelor's degree at Wilberforce University in 1903. And also, it helps that we bring the role that women played in the South African struggle. So I really appreciate that. And you also have the map of the Cape Colony. The Cape is important. That's how the colonialists, how South Africa or Southern Africa was colonized. That was the entry point. And the bottom image left, I was not able to see that even with my magnifying glass. I tried, you know, historians will always have this. I tried to look, John, who's that, but maybe it's either Amazulu or Amaxhosa king. And also the rock art image there is very, very important in South African history. And the protest march, I cannot see where it did happen, maybe Alexandra. And the last image, also very, very important in South African history, of Cecil John Rhodes. Okay, so John and Maryke, I thought the cover really, it is a fair representation of a brief history of South Africa. So got a good job with those images, with the choices of these images. So the contents, I just want to quote the foreword by former President Kgalema Motlanthe, which I think is important for this book. And I quote, since 1994, we have been in an extended period of defining through the work of historians. School curricula have been adjusted and reflect a more inclusive view of South African history, unquote. I think the historians who wrote this book, John and Maryke, and the publication of A Brief History of South Africa have made a contribution to this redefining, adjusting, and reflecting of our history that Motlanthe alludes to in his foreword. okay? And also in the preface, what I liked and which I agree with is that the statement in the preface that effective, I quote, effective history teaching has not been prioritized in South African schools since 1994, as is on page 9. That for me is a good justification why this book has been written. This book saw that those of us involved in teaching of history, be it in the school system or history of education universities, can make the history teaching a priority and teach it effectively and successfully. We're trying to do that here at VETS. To labor this point, I'm teaching history for B.Ed. They are completing. One of my students last week in class was telling us that when the ANC government came to, when the ANC, and I quote him here, when the ANC government came to power in 1994, in his school, history was no longer taught. And this student is a white student from a small town in KZN. Okay, so it's really, it speaks to the effectiveness of how history should be taught. And I think this book is playing, is making a contribution to that. Now, as John has already told us, the book is divided into 2 parts. Part A, narrative history from the earliest time to Mandela Presidency in 1999. And part 2 address the historical developments with 9 themes. I won't mention them, but what I like there, John, is theme number 6, women's struggles. We don't talk really much in our, the CAPS document as well, curriculum for teaching history in basic education. We don't emphasize that, and my, outspoken female student in the class always mentioned that, Dr. Nell, we don't have enough of women in the CAPS document, and we try to look at that. So I'm really happy about that. And also number 9, the international solidarity movement against apartheid is also important. We need to talk about how apartheid was defeated internationally. So this part 2, the themes, this concept of themes provide easy accessibility for preferred themes than reading all 9 themes. If you want to look at international solidarity, you can go there. If you want to read about the Bantustan, you can go there, So the book is short, but progressive. It's in its introduction to the history of South Africa. It is not comprehensive, which was not its objective, but rather it gives an overall outline of South African history that gives the big picture idea, perspective to the readers, okay? So without excluding colonization and segregation, the primary focus of this book is to describe the crucial and central role of resistance to colonialism and racist rule of the decade. Resistance to colonial invasion and occupation, the struggle against oppression that was fought by political, social, and trade union movements in modern era. As stated in the book, a brief history is impossible to include all themes, all movements. Less known movements have been referenced to the reader. If interested, can pursue that beyond this book with the provision of suggested additional reading. So what's the objective of this book? It's a study guide for adult education, formal and informal, to expand and enrich their comprehension of SA history. The second aim of the book, which relates to us in history of education, is to strengthen history teaching in schools, to provide much needed additional support that the school's history teachers need. Gives them a range of resources and sources, material for their learners, and direct them to a variety of sources that provide different historical interpretation. At the end of each chapter or theme, a list of further readings and discussions or activities are provided. This helps the learners in their engagement with the text, theme, or chapters. And I am going to I'm going to reference, make this book suggested readings, in particular, John and Maryke. I think the discussion part and the online resources that you have put there and suggested reading are very, very helpful. And the question that you are asking, the first question that you ask in most of the discussion question, the first one you start with is, what is it that you learn about this chapter that you didn't know before? And that I think is good because it gives the students the opportunity to say what they knew about, for example, APO, African Political Organization, which was a colored resistance organization in the Cape, founded in 1903, before 1903 or 2, basically 10 years before the formation of the ANC. So we need to also bring that into the classroom so that our students, colored or Indian, can see that also their forefathers played a role in the struggle in South Africa. And also it helps us to deal with this marginalization of other histories, other minorities, the coloreds and the Indians. So I really thought that was very, very important. And the book ends with Mandela Presidency in 1999. The opposition to colonial and racist rule by political and trade union organization of Black people, and I quote, was supported by some anti-racist whites in page, you write that in page 10. John and Maryke, I think that is very, very important. I mean, here at VETS, we're not only teaching Black or African students, we have colored, we have white students in the classes. And I always emphasize that this is critically important for teaching history in post-1994 South Africa. I mean, these kids were not here during apartheid. They don't carry the burden of history that we carry, that we went through education during apartheid. So both in the school and in the university education, for example, in my history education classes methodology and content, I emphasize that images of white South Africans who fought against apartheid, e.g. Bram Fischer, Ruth First, Joe Slovo. I saw Joe Slovo in the book. I can't remember if I saw Bram Fischer, but it's important that we bring into the classroom so that our students can see. So white learners or students in our classes can see themselves in these images and have confidence in wanting to be activists, because we have so many problems. The same with Indian and colored South African images. Ahmed Kathrada, I've interviewed Ahmed Kathrada, footage. When I teach about the importance of oral history, I bring the interview and they can listen to him and the question that I've asked, and they can critique that, the weakness, the shortfalls of strength of doing oral interviews, okay? And also Sophia Williams de Bruyn, one of the women who led the 1956 Women's March in Union Building. I saw she is there in the book, the colored activist. Very, very important, John, that you're able to bring this into the book. So the resistance to oppression by communities, women, and youth movements are refreshing aspects of this book, John and Maryke. Most histories have marginalized this group, so I was really happy to see that. And John and Maryke, I'm also happy that you dealt with the terminology used in the book, in particular with two terms, race and students. The authors have made a choice to adopt the use of word Black to refer collectively to oppressed groups and African to refer to indigenous Black people. Student is reference made to anyone attending educational institutions, right? So I was happy about this. Anyone who's reading won't have a problem with that. What is it that I want to highlight? John and Maryke, I was happy. I mean, when I went to school in the 80s in Garankuwa, I'm from Garankuwa, the history lesson on the history of South Africa started with Jan van Riebeeck, 1652. So John and Maryke, I'm happy, very, very happy. And I was looking forward to critique you on that. I'm very, very happy that we have chapter 1, South African societies up to 17th century. And in that chapter 1, you talk about Southern Africa ignoring political borders, and that Southern Africa includes Botswana, Lesotho, Mozambique, Namibia, Eswatini, and Zimbabwe. And I was happy as well that in the graphs and maps and discussion, you have Mapungubwe and Great Zimbabwe, amongst others. In this first chapter, you know, is enriching because these are important themes of sites of civilization in pre-colonial Africa. So I was very, very impressed with that. What else I want to highlight? And so these chapters, they are very short, 10 to 11. I think the longest is 11 pages. The shortest is 7 pages. You are able to read it, and you know the issue of concentration span with our students, they are able to read it and also go straight to the question to deal with that. I really appreciate that there. So John, you have chapter 1, you have chapter 2, and you have chapter 3 before you can, okay, it's only in chapter 3 that you talk about the Jan van Riebeeck. So you have had 2 critical chapters that are talking about the history of South Africa before Jan van Riebeeck, which debunks the myth that the history of South Africa starts with the arrival of Jan van Riebeeck. So I was happy about that. Another important part, John and Maryke, is this, in chapter 3, you talk about slavery in the Cape. We don't talk about the slavery in the Cape as if it didn't happen. So that really, we only talk about slavery when we talk about the, you know, the African diaspora, America, you know, the Americas, Africans who were enslaved, who were taken from Africa and enslaved in the Americas, as if it didn't happen here in South Africa. So the addition of this section, slavery in the Cape, really decolonizes the writing of South African history, because, for example, my history education in the schools and the university during apartheid never taught about slavery in the Cape. And most of the history textbooks after 1994 did not teach that or have a section on that theme. So good job there. What's the other thing that I want to, okay, also in that chapter, Dutch East Indian Company period, you also talk about the introduction of slavery in the Cape through the importation of Muslim slaves from Asia, parts of Africa and Madagascar. And that is why my scholarship is on Robben Island. I work for the Robben Island Museum. That is why we have the Kramat, a mosque on Robben Island, over a grave of Sheikh Said Matura, who was brought as a political prisoner from Asia during this period of the Dutch East, or before the Dutch East Indian Company. So that also is an image that could go into the book. The emergence of colored people in the Cape is part of this history of slavery. We cannot just talk about the colored community without looking at the roots as well. Also in that chapter, the Khoisan resistance to colonial expansion in the Cape, very, very important. Those that I'm mentioning, John and Maryke, are the gaps that I think you guys have filled, which are just overclosed when we teach the history of South Africa. We have the Khoisan resistance, and in that I have mentioned, for example, you have Ochomato, who was male of the Khoisan, and Krotoa, who was a female. In colonial historiography, they are referred to as Harry and Eva by the Dutch. They were also imprisoned or banished on Robben Island. There's a map in page 39. I wish that map had included Robben Island, but it did not. But these are just minor issues that could be discussed in the classroom. Very, very important points, John, that you have raised. Also when you talk about the Zululand and Natal, you also talk about the African victories against the British, Isandlwana, Battle of Isandlwana. Those are very, very important that we bring into the classroom. So this chapter, all the questions that you ask, the first question, what is the most interesting information you learned in this chapter? It really creates it gives the students or whoever, you know, the Readers Club, the opportunity to talk about, it gives the student or whoever who's reading the freedom to bring their own content to answering this question. Like a learner will say, before I read this chapter, this is what I knew. Or a learner will say, what I didn't know about this chapter is 1, 2, 3. So I thought that was very, very, very important. What's the other thing that I really thought was important about the book? I mean, so if I don't look at my notes, how I would really say about this book is that a brief history of South Africa from the earliest time to the Mandela Presidency, 1999, it's critical in closing some of the gaps in how the history textbook of apartheid curriculum have left out. And I've mentioned a few that that I think are important. The mentioning of the inclusion, the image of Charlotte Maxenge. It brings the participation of African women, their contribution in the struggle in South Africa. Also, with the First World War, the images of the First World War, chapter on the First World War, which is chapter 8. I was also touched, John, that you put the Morogoro, Tanzania soldiers' graves, which is racially segregated, you know. And I remember when I was doing my research in Morogoro, I was thinking about you, and I was thinking about Jerry and all the South Africans who were there. And also the ship of, the image of ship of SS Mendy from World War I, that sank with killing 616 South African. These are important. I mean, in the classroom, you can just put a teacher, a history teacher, can just put the SS Mendy, you know, in the PowerPoint or just a picture on a chalkboard, you know, just post-stick it there. And we can ask our learners, what is it that they know about this ship, you know, and we can have a lot of discussion on that. And chapter 11 on Second World War and after, throughout, John, when I was reading, I was thinking, I hope I'm going to find the image of the Tompas here, you know, the passbook. Very, very important. It's there in the book. I mean, I have my fathers, you know, I have my mothers, you know, because I'm a Motswana from Botswana, so I started my academic university studies at the University of Botswana. So I have also a Bantustan, which is also part of the theme in your book. I have a Bantustan ID. Those things are very important. A teacher, a history teacher can say, go home and ask your grandfather to give you their identity books that they have at home, and they can bring to the classroom. There can be a lot of discussion on that, okay? Also with the Defiance campaign, the pictures that we normally don't get, James Moroka there, some of the leaders of the Defiance campaign, also Yusuf Dadu, you know, so that the students in our classroom can see themselves in that. John, I'm happy that your book, the cover of your book, the images in your book doesn't have Verwoerd, you know, but Verwoerd is there in chapter 14, Repression and Regrouping, 1960 to 1964, okay? Very, very important, but because we are really, I'm seeing this book as part of decolonizing history curriculum in South Africa. You have an image of Verwoerd there, and you also have a picture image of Tsafandas, Dimitri Tsafandas who assassinated Verwoerd. all pictures of Nelson Mandela in Addis Ababa in 1962, very important, O.R. Tambo, Albert Lutuli, and also the revival of mass movement, 1964 to 79, you know, with the Rivonia trialists on Robben Island. You have Biko, the images of Steve Biko. The only critique with the images, the one image that I really missed, John, in chapter 13, page 131, you talk about the Pan-Africanist Congress. I wish there was an image of Robert Sobukwe. But I'm very happy with this book, and I've also told my colleagues in the history, because I'm currently facilitating a coordinator of history courses in the School of Education. I've also told them about the book, and will send an email to the library so that they can purchase a copy if they haven't, and I will make sure that we use it, not because I know John, I don't know Maryke, but I know she's a history teacher, not because of that, but because I think it's a valuable book that we can use by improving teaching history in the schools and in the university effectively. Thank you. Thank you, Tukelo.
All right, thanks for that, Neo. At this point, I'm going to give Bridget to briefly tell us how we can get the book, and yeah, after that we can have a question and answer session. You can also use the chat option. I would just like to ask that if you're not speaking, please mute your mic, because it creates an echo which disrupts the flow of the webinar. Over to you, Bridget.
Thank you very much indeed, and thank you to everybody for this wonderful discussion. I'm from Jacana Media, and we're immensely proud to have published this book, and so grateful to the authors, to John, to Maryke, but also to Karen Pampallis, because they were the ones that showed us what a great idea it was going to be to publish this. Sometimes publishers don't get it right, you know, and we were thrilled to bits when we published this book, because it has something for everybody. I really think it has. I think the descriptions that have been given, engaging, insightful, accessible, these are all, this helps propel this book out into the world. And the book continues to sell through local booksellers. That's number one I wanted to tell you, is that you can walk into a bookshop in South Africa and chances are that you will find the book on the shelves, which doesn't always happen a few months after publication. So it is a steady seller, and it's going to be one of those books, we call them books that have legs. They keep on going. And if you go into a bookseller and the bookshop doesn't have it, please ask them to order it. There's plenty in stock, and we love to sell through bookshops. But we also sell directly from our website. And for all the participants and those invited to this webinar, we've offered a special discount, and you use the coupon code HISTORY30 when you're purchasing the book from the Jacana Media website, HISTORY30, and you will get a 30% discount off the retail price of the book. And that retail price is 240 Rand. So it's a very reasonable 360 pages, I want to tell you, of great accessible reading. The book is, so we've got it available in bookshops, we've got it through our website, we have it as a Kindle edition, and that Kindle edition is available through Amazon. We also have, I'm just seeing what Jill de Vlieg is saying, every school and university library. Well, here, I hope so too. because if you are though watching this from overseas, you will be able to purchase hard copies of it, not just the Kindle edition. There are hard copies available that will be available on Amazon, but also through Central Books in the UK. The pound price for this, I don't have a dollar price, I'm afraid, but the pound price is £18.95. So I think we're much more reasonable here at 240 Rand. You were commenting now on the cover, and I just wanted to say I think that is one of the reasons why this book does so well in the bookshops, because it's got a pickupable feel about it, and we're thrilled, and we're always delighted when people notice Jacana covers. I think that I don't have much more to say except thank you. Thank you to all of you for continuing the discussion around the importance of history, around the popularizing of it. Thanks to Ariana. I see that you put up the note about the discount on the chat. And thank you, History Workshop, for this launch and for the wonderful work that you do always. So from me, Bridget at Jacana, thank you, everybody. And I will say bye-bye. Thank you.
All right. Thanks a lot, Bridget. I don't see any hands, but if you would like to make a comment, you can just raise your hand, and then I'll take maybe three at the same time, and then John can have a chance to respond. You can also use the chat option to type in your comment, and then I can read it. I see Prof. Risigan. I don't see any other hand, so I'll take Prof. Risigan now.
Thanks so much, Tukela, and thanks for the presentation. Congratulations on the publication of the book. I think we cannot but overemphasize how critically important it is, especially at this time as well. There's 2 points I want to raise, if that's all right, Tukela. And the first one is, while we recognize how important history is, it's also important that we contextualize history. And I think Neo was maybe pointing to these issues as well. In other words, once we have the book in hand, how we actually make use of it. And I tried to put a point in the chat box about that. You know, we talk about the discovery of gold, but we have evidence of civilization existing in this part of the world from 300 years before that date. So how is it that gold was discovered after it had already been in use? So I think us reconnecting these histories becomes very significant. And it's in the telling, in the narrative, how we account for these. The second point then is the question really to John and all the colleagues that are on the call itself or at this launch. And this speaks to how we draw this history together and also decolonize the way we understand history. You know, in other words, we need to discard the notion of 1652 and the lie that it actually is. But in that, to remedy it, we need to have a longer history of ourselves in the global South as a whole, the type of lives we lived, and the relationship we have with each other and the nature that surrounds us. This is so critically important. If anything that I take away from 1652 is the formal establishment of an enclosed area that becomes the first instance of private property in Southern Africa. If we use that as the marker, colleagues and comrades, we have a lot more to tell, and we really owe it to all generations to start contributing towards that. Thanks again, colleagues, and congratulations on the launch of the book. Thank you.
Thanks for that. I'll take Neo as well, so that John can answer maybe both of them, and then I'll take another round of hands. Go ahead, Mpo, please.
Hello? Hello, am I understandable?
Yeah.
I have questions that I would like to put through, to pose, but let me say, what a thrill, what a thrill. I like this history book. I think it will help us to really understand ourselves better. Out of 5 questions, I think I'll only ask 3 here. Does the book cover sufficiently the land acquisition in terms of where communities were, individual communities, how were they rounded up and their land taken off from them by those who were taking over by the Number 2, does it also cover how the boundaries came into being that cut South Africa into a smaller piece, which it is now, excluding Botswana, Namibia, Swaziland, and Mozambique? According to me, Mozambique was part of South Africa before, even during the times of the head man who was sent as a hero by Shaka to go and annex. He ended up in Mozambique, in Pemba. Pemba is not Pemba, it's Mpemba, which is part of our culture in Nguni, in isiZulu, especially the Mpelles. And then finally, I wanted to check. There's a thing that history is made by people, but it only records individuals, not the crowds. How true is that relating to this history book? I thank you.
All right. John, you wanna respond to the comments? I think it's mostly comments except for Mpo's questions.
Oh, okay. You can hear me now. Yeah. Yeah, as you said, these are comments from Raffigan. And Mpo asked, does it cover the land question adequately? Look, what I should say is that it covers it briefly. And the readings we give at the end of the chapter deal in more detail with that and with other issues. Because it's a book with a long span, trying to cover everything in detail. I mean, we can't really cover everything in detail. So that's it. So what we do, we have to answer the land question, but expect people to learn more from the other readings that we've included at the end of the chapter. And of course, beyond that, the issue of the borders of South Africa, that hasn't been dealt with. No. I mean, we do deal with the fact that Africans didn't see South Africa as it is today. It was just Africa in many ways. And so when the ANC was established, by the way, it included people from Swaziland, from Lesotho, from Zimbabwe, and so on. So the actual borders were drawn largely by the British. Now the last question from Mpo says, history only records individuals not, and I didn't catch that word, Could import, just say that again, please. Anyway,
Do you hear me?
You're muted, Mbo.
Mpo's muted.
Yeah, he's still muted. Please, if you can't unmute, you can use the chat.
I'm
Now we can.
able now together.
Go
Am I
ahead.
now
Go
audible?
ahead.
Okay. Our history is made by people, but it only records individuals in most activities and not crowds who are part of that activity in history. How true is that relating to this history book?
Thanks. I think that obviously individuals play an important role in history, but we tried not to make it a book which looks at just the role of individuals. We want to look at social processes, economic processes, organizations, and how all these have interacted in order to make the history that we have. In the early part of the industrial period, we paid quite a lot of attention to the mining industry and how that transformed South Africa, how the migrant labor system came in, and so on. And it goes through, that kind of approach goes through the book, I think. And we tried not to make it a story about how individuals on their own make history. It's not a great man or great woman view of history. Thanks.
All right. Thanks, John. Thanks, John, for that. I don't see any more hands. I think we have space for one or two. If there are no other questions, I think, let me just see if there are hands. There are no other hands. At this point, I would like to thank you, John, for making time, even though you're struggling with your voice after your surgery. And congratulations on the book. I certainly look forward to reading it. And thanks to Jacana for the 30% discount. I just want to say that this webinar, this launch will be available on the YouTube channel of the Wits History Workshop. So if you've missed some discussions on the webinar, you can check it out there. And that brings us to the end of today's session. Thank you very, very, very much, John.
Thank you.
Thank you. And thank everybody.
Thank you.
Cheers. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
John. Thanks, Fritz.
Thank you, John.
You're welcome, and thank you.
Thanks, John. Cheers.
Cheers. Bye-bye.
Thanks, John. Take care. Yeah. Bye.
Yeah.
Thanks, John. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Oh,
All
well,
the best, John.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. Great discussion.
Thanks. Okay, so we sign off now.
Thank you both.
Congrats on your
Thank
launch.